Welcome everybody to Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs. It is April Fool's Day. So far we have survived unscathed, but that's because my father's no longer alive. If he was still alive, we would have all had effects of April Fool's beginning like right away in the morning. Anyway, welcome. It's good to have you. Today we are beginning with fair housing. We've just passed out our major housing bill. But today is Fair Housing Day in the State House, and so we're celebrating all things fair housing. We're going to begin with Big Hartman, our director of the Human Rights Commission, but I think for everybody in the room, we're going to introduce ourselves first. So,
hi, I'm Tom Chittenden. I represent the southeast area of Chittenden County.
And we have Tasha Ram Hinsdale, who will be here in a moment, who represents the same district. I'm Allison Clarkson. I represent the Windsor County District.
I'm Randy Brock. I represent Franklin County and Northern Grand Isle County.
Great to meet you.
Good morning, Big. And yes, Dave Weeks representing Rutland.
Which is great. And it's wonderful to have you all here, so many visitors. It's great. Terrific. So Big, why don't you introduce yourself and take it away?
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Big Hartman. I use they, them pronouns. I'm the Executive Director and General Counsel at the State of Vermont Human Rights Commission. Very pleased to be with you today. I see that you all have printed out hard copies, so I love me some hard copies too, but I thought I should share my slides. What my plan for today is just to really give you a sense of what is fair housing and how is this playing out in Vermont, especially. So I have a little agenda for us. Let's see if I can go to the next page. So I'll give you a little overview of the Human Rights Commission and what our office does. And then I want to give you like a real quick broad brush picture of fair housing protections, especially under Vermont law.
And as you know, we just passed in S122 a further inclusion of protected classes of immigration status and citizenship.
Great. Yes.
So you know that we've passed that, the House has passed it as well.
And H169 has some additional provisions and some taken up by the House General Committee this afternoon.
Great.
So it's all aligning beautifully with our scheduled Fair Housing Awareness Day. April is Fair Housing Month. And there will be a concurrent resolution coming out about Fair Housing Month, along with the governor's proclamation in, I think, sometime next week. Great. So after I cover a little bit about fair housing protections, which I could talk to you about all day, I'm just going to really keep it succinct for you. I want to give you some examples of what our common fair housing cases tend to look like, and then share with you some data about what we're seeing in terms of trends in the last year and a half. And some of our enforcement actions. The Human Rights Commission has been able to really step up our enforcement in court. So the mission of the Human Rights Commission is to promote full civil and human rights in Vermont. So we're looking at protecting people specifically from discrimination in three main areas of the law. And we do that by investigating complaints, helping folks who have complaints resolve them by being like an intermediary. We file lawsuits when appropriate, and we do everything we can to educate the public with the limited resources we have available to do that. We are an independent state agency. We're not under any, larger part of state government. We have 7 total employees. We're all exempt employees. Most of our funding comes from the general fund, and we have a contract with HUD where we dual file fair housing cases that also implicate federal fair housing laws, and that helps us with about 10% of our budget typically. We're hoping to see more next year, but who knows?
Yes.
Any effect in the first 2 months of the current administration to your HUD funding?
There's a very small effect that we are being told to keep an eye out for, which is that the federal government has told us that they will not be paying, we get paid per case. We've been told that they will not be processing for payment cases involving gender identity discrimination. Where we're seeing it play out is really not even in cases that are focused on gender identity discrimination, but just brought by people who are trans, who allege additional types of discrimination, especially around disability. Right now that only makes up 2 of our current cases that are dual filed. So it won't be a significant impact on our operations. We are concerned that that office, the Fair Housing Economic Opportunity Office of HUD could be facing significant cuts to their staffing to the tune of maybe 75% of their staff who we interact with regularly, and who are responsible for actually processing our payments and our cases. So we don't really know though exactly how that's going to play out. And then there's always a concern that the contract that we have with HUD will suddenly not be lived up to on their end, which would have of what we budgeted for fiscal year 26 to 10% of our budget impact. Only about 100,000 under is what we budgeted for the next fiscal year. If everything goes well with that contract, we are expecting to get more than we had budgeted because we really have stepped up our fair housing cases in the last year under my leadership.
Right.
Okay, so as I mentioned, I just want you to know that our office has 3 main buckets of jurisdiction. One is fair housing, and that's where about at least half of our cases tend to center around. We also enforced Vermont's public accommodations protections and employment discrimination, but only for when the state of Vermont is the employer. Non-state employee discrimination claims will go to the Attorney General's Office Civil Rights Unit, which is separate from us. So just a little bit of an overview of what our office does with our complaints. So we have an intake process where we get a lot of phone calls and emails primarily. Folks reaching out to us from all over the state saying, I think that my rights are being violated. We definitely we try to provide a high level of customer service, but without a full-time intake person, it's very hard to do that. I myself have been answering the phone since the summer. It's not really a very sustainable situation, and we are hoping to see a new position created that would be able to do just intakes.
And that is the governor included that in the budget.
No,
So, but you've made that ask.
we've made that ask for the last 2 years. And it is envisioned now in the current version of the House that made it out of the House budget.
So the House is included in its budget.
Yes.
Okay.
So the intake process, we really do have to be more and more selective about the cases that we're able to accept for investigation, because I only have 3 investigators statewide conducting all of our investigations. Our investigations are pretty thorough. We request information from all parties and any third-party witnesses. We conduct live interviews that are recorded. We gather documents. The end of that process, we will write an investigative report that summarizes the facts we've gathered and contains a legal analysis about whether or not there's reasonable grounds to believe that discrimination occurred. Those reports are reviewed by commissioners. We have 5 commissioners who are governor appointees. Coach Christie is our chair.
Bill?
Bill.
Yeah. Don't you have terms of office?
Yeah, 5-year terms, and his last term was renewed. So he's partway through a second term as chair. The commissioners meet once a month and hear cases. They conduct informal hearings to hear from the parties, and then they make a final determination about whether or not there's reasonable grounds to believe that discrimination occurred.
And are all 5 appointees, is everything filled at the moment?
We currently have 1 vacancy that just opened up last month. Yeah. The terms expire at the end of February each year. There's 1 person whose terms expired. In cases that we find there's reasonable grounds to believe that discrimination occurred, we have the ability to to enforce that law in litigation in Superior Court. And about 2 years ago, we were authorized to create a new position who's a full-time litigator in
Right.
our office. And that job is extremely busy. It turns out there's no shortage of cases that we could litigate. We just have never really had this kind of capacity. And so we're very excited
So
about
Laura
that.
herself.
Right, it was the director before who was the lead of the litigation prior. Our senior counsel, Mitch Ruppert, is out in the card room right now if anyone wants to chat with him later about our litigation. I do have with me these great booklets that I made last year that are an overview of the Human Rights Commission process. It's geared towards parties, but it's really meant just to provide information so folks know what to expect when they have a complaint with us.
Right.
Moving forward, fair housing laws define what we call an unfair housing practice. It's basically any time that someone is treated differently or unfairly because of their membership in a legally protected category. And I'm citing section 4503 of Title IX. So I've listed here all of our legally protected categories, both under federal and state law. So federal law provides sort of the base protections, and then state law can provide additional protections on top of that that are not protected under federal law. When we have a case that implicates both federal and state law, we can dual file it with HUD pursuant to our contract and get some payment for that processing that case. It's not very much, but it is a little bit.
Good luck, John.
Sure. Sorry.
And then, so the categories of state law that are not protected expressly under federal law, the biggest category we see is receipt of public assistance. That is not protected under federal law, but it's basically, someone can't be, too many landlords still aren't aware of this, that just saying, I don't accept housing vouchers is not lawful. It's to address the reality that there are folks who rely on public assistance to pay for their rent and to pay for their housing or to provide income to pay for their rent. And they should not be denied housing based on that. We do see more cases than we would like involving receipt of public assistance. And we're trying to pursue those as often as we can, and also to get the word out to as many landlords and property managers that that's not actually lawful to tell people you won't accept their payments from or accept it as income. Victims of domestic and sexual abuse are another legally protected category that's special to Vermont law, and they also have additional things they can ask for, like a change to the locks and enhanced security and things like that, that are especially written into Vermont state law. Under the plain reading of federal law, sexual orientation and gender identity are not expressly legally protected. However, the U.S. Supreme Court interpretation of sex discrimination has very clearly and resoundingly, even in recent decisions, verified that can be interpreted, sex discrimination can be interpreted to apply to sexual orientation and gender identity discrimination as well. But we went out of our way back in 2007 in Vermont to expressly protect those two categories.
I remember very clearly. I was on the first district doing that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, Grant.
In terms of the receiving public assistance breakdown, is there any restriction or stigma associated with a landlord doing credit reporting and using credit reports as part of the decision process for rental?
Not if it's one of the basic eligibility requirements that they would apply for all tenants. But if you're only doing credit checks on certain types of applicants, then we would be very concerned about that as being a discriminatory impact.
Well, for example, though, assuming that it is done to all tenants and the decision point is the person doesn't have the financial capability to meet the needs of the landlord in terms of rent and associated costs, how would that work in terms of the receipt of a voucher, for example, or set the
voucher would help pay for it.
Yeah, the vouchers are payments directly to the landlord, direct deposited each month. So it's a pretty good deal for the landlords if they're willing to just sign a few forms and authorize those payments to their accounts. Having a standard practice of like a certain base credit score or that kind of thing is lawful.
Mhm.
We do start to feel concerned about whether that would have a discriminatory impact on certain populations that are going to be historically denied good credit because of a variety of kind of.
But one of the things we're looking at right now,
Yes, you can
in
know about it.
another bill that we're considering, is having landlords in a program that actually provides credit reporting, so as to allow people to build their credit score by
If they're renters,
consistently paying the rent on time. Now,
This is a great.
this is the treasure.
This is a great concept. We fully support that. And this is one of the ways that we can all work to combat the legacy of segregation in housing is by trying to think of these ways that folks who have not had the generational wealth to gain access to homeownership and credit can still get good credit because they have made timely rent payments for their whole life. They should still be able to get good credit. So I'm really glad to hear that
yeah,
that's an idea
that's
that's
under
being
discussion
discussed.
right now in this
Great.
committee and another bill. One of the concerns and part of the debate among some members of the committee is the concern that in this pilot is being proposed right now, they would process favorable credit. And if the credit is unfavorable, they don't send it in, even though the person has signed up for it. Do you have any thoughts one way or the other as to whether all credit should be reported once a person participates in it, or only favorable credit?
At the moment, it's a volunteer program. Tenants and landlords would participate voluntarily. And it's designed to positively build credit score. And if you fail to live up to the terms of the pilot, you would be removed from the program. But there's some concern that if that happens, that should be reported also to your credit.
Well, I think if the purpose of the program is to allow people to build good credit,
That's the purpose.
then rewarding the people who do pay their rent and, establish that they can make timely payments. I think that recognizing that and not using it as a punitive measure to harm people's ability to get credit later on would be good, because then
Well,
folks who
the
don't
tenant didn't pay
participate in
rent.
it and don't pay their rent, we're still gonna.
But the issue is the person decides to participate in the program. And when they pay their rent in a timely fashion, it gets reported to the credit bureau as something positive. But there has been some discussion about situations in which the person does not pay their rent on time,
Right.
whether that also should be reported or not reported.
In addition to being removed from the program. So I'm going to keep us on this because we only have it till 11:50.
I'd just like to get your opinion or
Yeah.
your thoughts in the position that you're in.
To me, that sounds punitive and not accomplishing the goal, which is to create opportunities for folks who pay rent to earn good credit.
Thank you.
So yeah, I wouldn't be supportive of that, but I'd like to see what other
Yeah.
jurisdictions are doing on that issue, because I know it is an effort that a lot of different communities are trying to create ways for folks
Right.
to pay their rent on time to have credit because of that.
Thank you.
Great.
Next time. Okay.
Okay.
I don't want to take up too much.
We have
I know we have
We have-
other people who have important things to say. So I just wanted to give you a little picture of what our fair housing complaints tend to look like. The most common group of cases involve disability discrimination, because folks with disabilities have additional rights that people who don't have disabilities don't have. And that's the right to name primarily to request reasonable accommodations. This is a change in how things are done, that it might be necessary for someone to use or enjoy their dwelling. And I have some examples I can use of that. But also we do see a fair number of race and color-based discrimination claims. That's what we would call more in the category of disparate treatment, meaning I think I'm being treated differently because of my race or skin color. It may be being treated differently than other tenants who are not of my race by being offered different terms or conditions of my housing, or having my lease terminated for no cause when my when other tenants in the building who are white are not having that happen to them, that type of differential treatment, very, very difficult to prove. But if we can find a comparison of another person who is not of the same protected class who received better treatment, that is what we would call circumstantial evidence of discrimination. We also are seeing more and more cases involving harassment, or what we call a hostile housing environment. These have been based on race and color, someone having a disability, and also in general, sexual harassment is on the rise in all areas of our lives once again. And then it's also important to know that a lot of cases also implicate retaliation claims. So someone who has exercised their rights under the Fair Housing Act, either by complaining about discrimination or by requesting a reasonable accommodation, might then experience retaliation by their landlord or property manager. All of a sudden, we're not going to plow your driveway. All of a sudden, we're going to serve you a no-cause eviction. And often we see claims that we'll see that in underlying discrimination claim, but also a retaliation claim sometimes comes after or alongside it. And then I've already mentioned that there's a body of cases we have right now involving landlords who refuse to rent to somebody because they receive public assistance, trying to get more education out for folks about that so that they're aware that they can't actually do that lawfully. I've already defined.
Just a quick question for you, babe. These all really pretty much have to do with renters. Do you see less discrimination with people trying to get mortgages and buy homes?
We rarely see those cases.
Right.
And I don't know if that's because that discrimination isn't happening, or if it's because folks don't know that they have protections in that area. A lot of information goes out to tenants and to renters,
Right.
Like kind of know your rights stuff, and homeowners, people who are trying to buy a home, don't always know that they have additional rights. And I think it can be very hard to show that you were denied a mortgage or an opportunity to buy a house because of your membership in a protected class.
Yeah.
It can be very hard to know that that's the reason why, or have some evidence for it. But we don't see those types of claims come in the door as often. So just a little slide about kind of our common examples of reasonable accommodation cases. Someone who needs an assigned accessible parking spot instead of being forced to kind of just take whatever spot's available when they get home, kind of thing. We certainly have a lot of cases involving assistance animals that are required for someone with a disability. A lot of landlords and property managers are still learning about the laws and the rules and regulations around that. HUD provides a world of guidance for us and for landlords. We're trying to always get that information out to the landlords and tenants, the landlords and property managers associations and such. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of a snippet of what our fair housing cases are looking like right now. At least half of all the inquiries that we get every day are something about housing. And our cases are on the rise in general in fiscal year 24. And I do have a copy of our annual report if you want to make me drill into the data a little bit more. We had 16 cases that went to a commission determination, and 7 of those we believe there were reasonable grounds to believe that discrimination had occurred. Just in the past year, we've really onboarded and much more detailed case management system. So our data each year that I come here and talk with you, I'll have more specific data for you that I can report on. But so far in this current fiscal year, starting in July, we logged 97 new intakes just about fair housing claims. And those are something more than a phone call where we talk to somebody for a couple minutes. It's something where we thought, okay, this might be a complaint that we would accept for investigation. So we create an intake file for that person.
In 24, how many referral or intakes do you have?
I don't have that data because I just started using the case management system in a consistent way in fiscal year 25. Yeah. So as we move forward, we'll have more comparisons that we'll be able to make. But we certainly processed a much larger number of fair housing cases in 24 than we did in 23. And the number continues to increase this fiscal year in terms of cases that we've accepted for investigation. And closed as well. I've tried to streamline our investigative reports so that the investigators are able to complete more each month. So out of the 97 new fair housing intakes that we logged, 17 of those have become complaints. 5 of them are still waiting for me to have time to draft their complaints, but 12 of them are currently under investigation now that are new cases from fiscal year 25. We are still working our way through a lot of fiscal year 24 cases as well. But we have heard or closed 22 fair housing complaints already this year compared to 16 all of last year. And only 7 of those have had reasonable grounds. But total, we have 48 open housing cases. And 33 of those are being actively investigated. We have a team of 3 investigators. So the other 33 that are not being investigated have either already had reasonable grounds determinations or they're being litigated in court. And so here's a little summary and you can review it later. I don't want to take too much more of your time, but just to say that we currently have 11 cases in litigation involving fair housing. These are cases where we believe that that discrimination had occurred. And all the attempts that we made to try to help the parties settle the case were not successful. Almost resoundingly, these involve landlords, owners, and property managers, not lenders and realtors as often at all. And often there's more than one legally protected category at play. And so we're seeing a combination of disability discrimination, often coupled with some other one or more additional legally protected categories. And often there is retaliation also that's a part of those claims. So I'd love to talk with you further about this whole world, but I also want to make sure that our other speakers today have time to share their
I guess I just, the competitive person in me wants to know how many of these cases in FY 24 and 25 so far have you won?
So we had one case that went to the Supreme Court against the town of St. Johnsbury involving a zoning decision that we won at the Supreme Court. It got sent back to the Superior Court. These cases are in early stages of litigation because I just got a litigator last year. So there's not been a decision in any of the fair housing cases that I've seen in the last 4 years that I've been at the Human Rights Commission. This is why we really needed a litigator so we can start to get some case law on the books applying our state fair housing laws. As we have more and more question about what is happening at the federal level, how is civil rights enforcement at the federal level going to be playing out in the next few years? State level enforcement of civil rights is all we have, and our protections are better. And we have this investigative process to get a really good picture of the facts before we decide to litigate it.
Perfect, Dave.
So good briefing. I'm interested in that second bullet about the fact that conciliation efforts were unsuccessful. It looks like, if I'm reading that right, all the conciliation efforts were unsuccessful. And if it was significant, it was
In those cases.
only in those cases.
Yes.
Because you have mediation that is successful.
Well, that's what
We
I'm
have
asking.
some cases that we hire a mediator to do a professional mediation. And sometimes we're able, especially in the investigative process, to just kind of facilitate conversations between the parties. Like, okay, you need this reasonable accommodation granted. Can I go over to the landlord and say, can you give them the accommodation? And
That
sometimes
kind
we're
of
able to
success
resolve
would be
cases.
interesting to share.
Yeah.
Data.
Yeah, I think I have some summary of that in our annual report. It doesn't go into the level of detail we might like. In this last fiscal year, we really didn't see as many settlements, and it's kind of an anomaly, and I don't have a good explanation for it. We are seeing more and more settlements happening now, and particularly in the public accommodations cases. I think we're hoping to see cases resolved rather than have to go through all of this process. But folks, really, there is some value to the complainants, especially of having their story told, having the entire process run its course and seeking justice through the civil litigation system.
Great. Well, thank you, Big. And I think given our time, we're going to
Totally.
pivot to Kalia from CVOEO. And it is, thank you very much for taking us up. These are chairs, so you just pull them out and
Okay, sounds good. Do you want me to take one?
I'm trying not to-
Sure, that might be easiest. Thank you.
Hello,
welcome, Gloria. It's good to have you.
thank you for having me. My name is Kalia and I work at the Champlain Valley Office of Economic Opportunity, known as CVOEO. And my role there is the Fair Housing Project Education and Outreach Coordinator.
Thank you
CVOEO
for sending your testimony ahead of time.
Of course.
Much appreciate it.
CVOEO is one of the state's 5 community action agencies. So for those resources, we serve the northern part of the state. We serve about 10,000 households annually, as well as 20,000 individuals with that with those community action services. And our overall organization is designed to combat poverty, work towards social, racial, economic, and environmental justice in our Vermont communities. I specifically work for the Fair Housing Project, which is part of our statewide housing advocacy programs, which provide resources for all Vermonters regarding fair housing related issues and questions that may come up. So some of the work that we do includes teaching fair housing related workshops to all people in the state, housing providers, tenants, homeowners, legislators, if you're interested. And all of these resources are generally free. We have a Vermont Tenants Hotline that people reach out to and ask housing related questions, from general landlord tenant laws about looking for questions about security deposits or evictions or notice periods, if what their rights and responsibilities are in various situations. And through that hotline, people also will reach out regarding fair housing related questions, and they'll connect to myself or Jess. And from there, we conduct a fair housing consultation with them. In those fair housing consultations, we generally discuss the person's situation, try to give the best next steps. We don't have any litigators or attorneys on staff. We're not attorneys. We just inform people of what their rights are and help them make the best plan of action for their situation. During consultations, I have assisted people with filing complaints with our enforcement partners, BIG at the Human Rights Commission, BIG behind me, as well as Vermont Legal Aid will make referrals to folks if they do need legal support for anything that comes up. Some of those consultations can look very different. I've had some people reach out regarding discrimination based on family status and marital status. A single mother who was being discriminated against by their housing provider, a property manager who was making discriminatory remarks about their ability to parent being an unmarried person. I've also assisted someone with filing a complaint based on receiving discriminatory remarks from a landlord for their gender identity. Lots of people call in with assistance needing help writing or making reasonable accommodation requests or reasonable modification requests. So there's an array of different things that we can support people with through our fair housing education and advocacy. Fair housing education and outreach. The Fair Housing Act was passed in 1968, and unfortunately, we continue to see illegal housing discrimination take place, especially in our beautiful state of Vermont. Most fair housing complaints that we see from both a statewide and national perspective are discrimination based on disabilities, race and skin color, and family status. Very recently, the provision in the Fair Housing Act to affirmatively further fair housing was terminated by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. So part of my testimony here is to raise awareness about why fair housing is important and why we need to continue to go out of our way to rectify some of the past harms that have stemmed from legal housing discrimination and segregation in our country's history. Through our statewide housing advocacy programs, we receive about 3,000 calls and emails a year, and we do hundreds of workshops to housing providers seeking fair housing education. Some of those include around 200 housing providers who are part of the FIP program and receive grant money from FIPS. We also have an online
Just
on-demand.
for those of us new to this committee, FIPS is an acronym for
VHIP, sorry,
VHIP. I was gonna say VHIP is like,
for Vermont Housing Improvement Program.
yes, okay, we're have done with this committee initially.
Great, wonderful.
So what's the tension that you were highlighting?
All of the housing providers who receive VHIP grant money get fair housing training. So we
That's great.
can give them that training.
Terrific.
We also have an online on-demand platform where people can get fair housing training for housing providers, and we'll soon have one for the general public as well.
Great.
So that is becoming more accessible for people who are seeking fair housing education.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm late. Senator Keisha Robinson. Hi, everybody. You ran quickly through the categories where you see the most discrimination. Can you speak to the nature of what that ends up looking like? I'm sure it's a broad spectrum, but just, helping to paint the picture of the when people discriminate against family status or disability, et cetera, what that ends up looking like. Or race or.
Generally, I've personally received a lot of calls or emails regarding people being discriminated against because they have a disability and not really knowing that gives them membership in a protected class. So I'll inform them of what some protections they have. And that can look like them requesting a reasonable accommodation or modification to help solve the issue that they're dealing with.
Mhm.
Sometimes they need support in communicating with their housing provider. So we have sample forms that we can provide people that cite the law and have language that they can use to send a letter to their housing provider. We also can reach out to their housing provider directly and just remind them of what the laws are and help to mitigate the situation a bit.
And what kind of accommodations are people asking for? Ones that are very low cost? Is there any financial support to help with those accommodations?
Sometimes there can be an economic component to the request that people are making, and it is up to the housing provider to determine what's reasonable.
Okay.
So I have seen things like rent increases for elderly folks or people with fixed incomes, which often are people who receive SSI or SSDI and have disabilities, where they will request a reasonable accommodation, maybe to transfer homes or to do something in their unit to help with the peaceful enjoyment of that space that would require money that they don't have. Or maybe they receive a rent increase that they can't afford because they're on fixed income and they're reaching out to see if they could request a reasonable accommodation or something like this. So that those economic limitations can definitely affect how people are able to practice these protections, because it's not necessarily named in the law that everything that they request is reasonable.
If someone offers at their own expense, let's say, to make the shower accessible or something like that, is it does the law require that the landlord accept that kind of accommodation?
Yes. So for something like taking out a tub and putting in a walk-in shower, if it's a housing provider that receives any sort of government funding, they would be required to pay for that modification. But if it's a private owned landlord, then that
Could be a negotiation. Or
or it might be on the tenant.
Wherever possible, do we ask people who receive a VHIP grant to make these amenities accessible?
I think that's a piece of what the VHIP grant could be used for.
I mean, I just wonder if we could say, okay, you're building a new unit, you have to make it a walk-in
I think
shower, because that would just.
Every unit?
Well, I mean, if like to the extent possible, let's say they're renovating an existing unit, but if they're putting in a new unit, I would think it's it's valuable.
It's like building a hotel. Does every room have to be accessible? And there's a financial limit there as well.
So I think we could discuss that when we get, after we walk through the housing bill, because we're getting,
Right.
of course, the housing bill from the House, which has another vehicle
Yeah.
section like we do.
And these modifications are based on the individual and what their needs are. So the
Mhm.
walk-in shower might be beneficial for one person in that unit, and then they move out and the next person actually needs a tub for whatever their
Mhm,
needs are.
right.
They also have disabilities.
Yeah,
But we could certainly, I think, anyway, discussing improvements to enable and accommodate people with disabilities would certainly be something that would be helpful for the VHIP grant, but maybe not all the units, maybe. Anyway, we'll discuss that in the future. Keep going, sorry.
Of
I
course,
guess
no worries.
I always struggle with the awareness days because it's just hard to be aware of things and not, be focused on solutions, but you are doing training, so that's great.
Well, I just want to emphasize that now more than ever, it's important that we practice fair housing, and this education is more important than ever. Because like I said, the AFFH provision has been terminated, and it's uncertain what fair housing enforcement will look like at a federal level.
Yes.
And with the Fair Housing Project, we do have a shared belief that everybody deserves access to safe and equitably affordable housing. The Fair Housing Act was developed to make discrimination illegal for anyone trying to rent, buy, or finance housing, for people to have an equal opportunity in housing choice. So I think that those words are crucial as we are experiencing this very tight housing market and seeing an increase in housing discrimination.
Right.
I just want to point out
Yeah.
the only housing metric that's currently on the books that GAC was supposed to be
Looking.
advancing or whatever was that people with disabilities can live with dignity in a setting they prefer. I don't think we've ever tied that to our policy, unfortunately. So I just, I have been working on fair housing, for 15 years since I was on House General, and I don't know that the federal government has ever really been that effective at underpinning our fair housing laws. Have you seen a big difference with different presidential administrations?
I'm new to this specific role, so I can't speak on that, but I will say in the time that I've been at the Fair Housing Project, there's been a huge change in what we've seen with this recent administration and things changing so quickly.
So you've seen a change, like more complaints coming in that people are being discriminated against?
No,
I think that,
just in the confidence in enforcing those complaints at a federal level, and certain changes that have come in where it's easier to file complaints at a state level without knowing, similar to what Big had stated, the federal government not taking on complaints that are based on discrimination of people based on their gender identity. Things, protected classes where I once was learned to be things that people can file complaints for. Those things seem to be changing very quickly.
well, it sounds
So-
like there's less support from the feds.
Yeah.
On things that Vermont has identified that we care about and we've embedded in our statutes.
Yeah.
Are you seeing an uptick in discrimination against people based on their gender identity? What percentage of that is the calls you get, the complaints that you get?
Most of the calls are based on people with disabilities. Some, I don't have specific data points. Some have been based on race and skin color, and family status, which is what we see nationally as well.
Mhm.
But I have had a couple of complaints about people being discriminated against for their gender identity, and I've assisted with filing a complaint for that person. Any other questions so far?
No, why don't you finish and then we will move to Mackenzie.
Great, thank you. So I think I covered why this work feels important. Most of the people that we serve are vulnerable people who have historically been marginalized and experienced discrimination in housing. So one thing that I really want to emphasize here is that as you all continue to do great work and move housing policies forward, that you keep some things in mind regarding who has access to housing as you are formulating these policies. So I just want to name a couple of suggestions. One, including requiring for housing education anytime a housing provider uses state funds to support private housing development. Including communities of people that are vulnerable to housing discrimination as protected classes, which we just saw a great bill pass to protect people based on immigration and citizenship status. Authorizing rent stabilization for all Vermonters, and more specifically, those with fixed incomes. As I've seen people with fixed incomes and other elderly people, although income is not a protected class, because those people have fixed incomes, it can be really difficult to sustain housing and be asked to move suddenly and figure out where they can access new housing.
Can I ask, does CDOE or does anybody have a rent stabilization model in another city or state that you think works well?
You can speak on that if there's something specific, but we do have legislative priorities that get a little bit more into detail about what rent stabilization could look like.
Mhm. And we do have rent stabilization for any programs that are state, largely state funded.
And these are just a couple copies of our legislative priorities for the year if folks want to take a copy. And we're also recommending that you all make policies designed to fund and reduce barriers to housing development that include provisions to perpetually make affordable housing. And I appreciate all of your work, and I thank you for your mindfulness and thoughtfulness of creating a more just access to housing in our state.
Well, it's good to have you on the fair housing job, Leah. It's great. Welcome. And you've been doing this for how long with CBOE now?
Less than a year. I started in July, but I've always been a passionate housing advocate. Thank you.
So we'll welcome up. I don't think we have, Jess, if you have something to add, okay.
We can turn it over
Well, Pansy, we would welcome you to come and join us. Okay. Thank you. Introduce yourself and share your testimony.
Okay. Hi, my name is okay. Hi, my name is Mapenzi Selemani, and I'm a junior from University High School.
Welcome.
Yeah, great to have.
I'm here today to talk about housing because it's a major issue facing families, especially immigrant families like mine. I want to share my story and talk about the barriers that families face when it comes to housing. My family first moved to Winooski from Zambia at the beginning of the pandemic, right in March 2020, when everything was first shutting down. There were 11 of us in a small 3-bedroom, 1 apartment house with no common space. Despite multiple people in my family working, sometimes multiple jobs, this was all we could possibly afford. We were doing school on our Chromebooks all over the house, but we made it work. There were a lot of problems with the apartment that were never addressed. One big issue was the landlord, who himself never came to visit us, but sent different people. One time he charged us rent that we had already paid. We didn't know what to do and were terrified of losing our housing, so we paid again. It was hard to communicate because as immigrants, we faced language barriers that made it difficult to talk to the landlord and understand what was happening. Living in that crowded space made it hard to focus on school, and it was stressful for my big family. Eventually, we moved to a new apartment in 2023, which was a bit better. But the rent kept going up. One of my parents has 2 jobs just to afford housing in Winooski, showing how many people are feeling the pressure. This issue has been affecting family members' relationships because some immigrant parents do not have a great relationship with their children anymore, or they only focus on their less paying jobs in companies and lack family time just to earn a living in Winooski. I've heard about this from several people because some of my friends' parents have 3 jobs, including working on weekends sometimes to earn a living. For families like mine, buying a house feels like an impossible dream. there are so many difficulties. The cost of homes is very high and many immigrant families do not have enough savings. Even when we are working hard, it's hard to save for a down payment when we can't even afford rent. The whole process of buying a house is confusing, especially with language differences, and sometimes we face unfair treatment. All these issues make it hard for families who just want a stable home. Housing is a major issue because it affects everything in our lives, like school, health, and family relationships. When families can't find affordable housing, it makes things much harder. That's why I think it's important for decision makers to listen to our experience. They need to think about families like mine when making housing policies. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Assembly. Thank you for taking. Wait. You don't get off that easily. We may have questions for you. So welcome, 5 years late. It's good to have you in Vermont. Thank you. That's a big journey from Zambia. And committee, do we have any questions from Mackenzie?
I have a question. First of all, thank you. You know, it takes a lot of courage to share, you know, a story about living in a crowded apartment and not feeling like you have what you need. So thank you for being willing to share. What do you wish was there for you in some of those situations? Was it hard to find language services to help? Was it hard to find someone who could help make sure that you knew your rights in your family?
I feel like finding someone to like stand up for us, that was hard because basically language barrier. We can't really like talk the way we want it to be addressed as. Because like especially my parents, because I can't like speak for them. They're the one that face these things. Then it's hard for them to like go out and ask for help when it's basically during the pandemic. So that was hard. One other thing that was like putting us down to finding housing opportunities when we are like living under this sickness. We can't go out and that. So it was generally hard to find like resources that could possibly help us to know our basic rights in owning a home. Yeah.
So to tag on to Keisha's question, did you come to Vermont under the umbrella of a refugee program?
Yeah.
And so that helped, I assume, at the beginning, and is it just that help began to evaporate as time went on?
Yeah, because when we come in, we have like a manager, a house manager, so that they come in and help with stuff, but it's not basically everything. They want help with like other problems that we may face according to like landlords and stuff. So it was really hard to like reach out for help.
And it's officially 8 months
Yes.
of help. I don't know if they do anything else after that, or that they don't have the resources. For those.
Yeah, and they don't have the resources for an ongoing case manager or a partner with you.
Yeah.
Which would be great if we could afford a navigator or a case manager to work with you in an ongoing fashion for a certain number of years till you really have your feet fully on the ground.
I also think this is a good case to be made for the first-time homebuyer education program. You know, we don't want it to feel out of reach for you and your family to buy a home. I care a lot about tracking the racial home ownership gap in the state, and I've asked all of our housing partners to track that with us. And probably it would be great for if the Human Rights Commission is doing the same thing. And what I hope we can do is make it really easy for people who want to become first-time home buyers in the state to figure out what it takes and how to access all the resources that are available. So I hope you stay in touch with all of the housing programs, and I hope they tell us, you know, if people are running into barriers to talk to banks and talk to housing partners about becoming homeowners.
Thank you.
So I'm just interested in additional barriers that we can help with, additional barriers that you face, language barriers. case management help in terms of
Mhm.
housing, clearly. You must have reached out at some point and used the resource of CDOEO. Is that how you
Mhm.
engage? Great.
Well, so basically, I'm working on a project in my cultural communication capstone class. It's basically focusing on the Champlain Housing Trust, and I'm raising awareness on first time home buyers to help them like
That's great.
yeah.
That is great.
Yay.
That's
That's
what I mean.
wonderful.
I will come with you
Yeah, yeah.
anywhere to help talk about
That
that.
that is great. It's a program near and dear to our
Mhm.
hearts.
Mhm.
That's terrific.
Thank you.
So
And
that's your,
thank you for doing that.
yeah.
Thank you.
Well, lived experience. This is like the perfect way to do a capstone project, which is great. And any other areas that are barriers that we could help alleviate and eliminate would be good for us to appreciate, because we want, needless to say, we are our arms are open to new Americans and to refugees, and we just need to make it easier for them to accommodate and adjust to life here in Vermont. And we would appreciate any ideas you have on how we can do a better job, other than funding resources. I mean, in addition, we appreciate the funding of resources and the challenge there.
Well, I just want to say it's really brave, but it's also concerning when young kids have to translate for their parents. So it sounds like, you and your siblings might have gone through that. And I just hope we take to heart, that's what happens when we don't have language services, that,
Yeah.
kids are put in really adult situations, and it's really not fair.
So we have some language services, but they're expensive, the translation services, which we are finding as
Oh, yeah.
which are an additional challenge. Anyway, thank you very much and good luck with your
They're
capstone.
necessary.
Yeah, necessary. And if you feel like at the end of your capstone wanting to share it with us, I think we would love to see this committee would be interested, and maybe when you're done with it, at the end of the, when is it due? When is
I
it?
can't remember.
June. Oh, in June, okay.
And did I miss that these are your fellow students who are working with you on
Yeah.
the project?
Well, we hadn't introduced them. So, Pansy, would you introduce whoever else is working on this project?
So basically, that's my teacher, Miss Amy,
Yay.
and these are my classmates. That's BT and Mrs. Sam and Dale.
So you're all juniors at Winooski High School?
We're seniors.
Yeah.
Great. Terrific. Well, thank you so much. Is there anything you'd like to add? Because we have 3 more minutes. Anything else you'd like to add to Mapenzi's testimony? She did a good job, didn't she? Yeah, sure. She rocked it. And as a teacher, would you, and with insight now into this experience, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
Housing, like housing stability.
Just introduce yourself.
Sorry, I'm Annie Schneider. I'm the teacher at Winooski High School. And what I've seen in the last 6 years of working there is that housing stability affects their ability to learn so much.
Yeah.
And students who are experiencing unstable housing, I've had a lot of students who are unhoused and are just not able to learn that environment. So I'm really proud of Mackenzie and other students I have who are sticking up for that and really pushing for housing stability. We need more housing, we need affordable housing, and we need housing for big families.
Yeah.
Because we have a ton of people who have 11 people in their family, and it's just not affordable. The stress is real.
Yes.
It is impacting so many of my students right now. You can't learn if you don't know where to place them sleep.
Right, and we have heard that refugee families are larger, and therefore, when you say a 3-bedroom apartment was too small, your family size is what? How big is your family?
For right now, I think we are 13 because we increased. And so because my older siblings are out in college, so it's better now because we are like less people now.
So shoo them off to college.
Yeah.
Get them out. Got it.
Mhm.
And your family also is good size? Yeah. And the average Vermont families sadly have just gone, we've decreased in number of kids that we're all having. So
Do you want to ask the other students?
yes, I'd love to. It would be great to know what are your family sizes?
Mine is 6.
6.
That's still above average.
Those are above average. As you know, the average Vermont family size is now 2 kids and 2 parents, or one, depending on family configuration. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming and helping illuminate our fair housing challenges. We are so grateful to you. And we want to see that capstone project. Thank you so much for coming, and don't be a stranger. Come back to the State House. It's our people's house. It's your house too.
Thank you.
Yeah. Enjoy the day. Thank you very much. Okay.
There's being a donut too.
Yeah, but there. Oh, great. Oh, great. We would love to have it.
We send it on.
Yeah, that would be great.
But I don't think it, so I don't want.
And Annie, what's your last name? Schneider? And what grade are you?
11 and 12.
Terrific. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Mark, where is Mark? Mark, come join us.
Thank you very
Is
much.
Cam-
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Big.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. I'll follow up.
Thank you.
We need data to do with the chart.
All big.
It's like, hey, we're like more housing and fairness.
If there's,
You know how I feel. We need data.
you just need to book it.
Well, I apologize. I put the ring on because,
It's okay.
Here's the bill.
And then we have the side by side, which Cam.
Oh, do you?
I have the side by side.
haven't seen the side by side, so.
Pam, I thought Pam sent it, but
well,
maybe
there was, he did a prior version.
Maybe sent it
I haven't seen the new.
so. We could email and ask him for it, but we have, but
here, he popped his head in, but then back out, so.
great. Welcome, Mark. It is good to have you. Keisha will be right back. Tom is coming. And I don't know where Tom went. Anyway, welcome. Thank you for coming to us. All pleasure. And we will. So you passed H 479. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for sending us such a big housing bill. We're very grateful. We sent one to you too. and We'll be up to discuss it. So why don't we start? Senior, if you could just close the door, that'd be great.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
Cam, if you can kind of close the door, we're going to start.
Yes, ma'am.
Great. Thank you. We're celebrating Heidi's birthday, so there are donuts and strawberries and
Take one.
well, actually, the committee will be great for everybody out there. And I'm gonna let council have some too before. Okay, Mark, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you.
Sorry. Have you met everybody on that? But, okay.
In fact, you all come, had the pleasure of seeing you all upstairs, so. I apologize in advance that I might be yanked upstairs in a second for a roll call.
It's
So you're
okay.
hearing this.
We appreciate
it.
It will dig at us.
Yeah, right. What I thought I would do quickly is just focus on comparing the two bills, your bill and our bill.
Yes, and we have a side by side, which we will
Right,
get as
and
soon
I'm
as
just
we can
gonna
get.
go, I'm gonna be really quick at this point. I'm really pleased with your bill because your bill and our bill are not like this. They're like this. In other words, there's a few places where you did this, worked on things we worked on, and the language is almost identical. And then there are other areas where you've done a lot of work where we didn't do anything, and vice versa. So I think it will be not a terribly difficult task to stand up and work this out. I mean, that's maybe I'm naive because I haven't done this before, but I think it should be okay.
Sounds like you're doing great. I'm sorry.
Did you introduce yourself, Mark?
I didn't, let me take the.
It's okay, it'll be here, so
Yeah.
we'll know when you get a roll call.
Mark Mahaly. I represent Callis and Plainfield and Rushfield, and I'm chair of the housing in general and housing committee.
It's wonderful to have you.
It's a pleasure to be here. And I have a feeling maybe in our future lives, another joint hearing But now that we have room 11, it won't be so crowded.
Which will be good.
So I'm just gonna run through really quickly, and then we can focus more on whatever interests you or answer questions. VHIP, the VHIP program were identical. The only difference, it's an interesting difference. We had a concern, as you may remember, last year, as of last year, under current laws, both the 5-year VHIP programs and the 10-year VHIP program had the same language requiring housing, taking people from the homeless population. The administration felt strongly that the housing, the requirements take people from the homeless population in the 10-year program should be taken out. They even felt it was a mistake to put it in originally. They felt like, why would anyone go for the 10-year program if they had the same requirements as the 5-year program? Which I understand. Our concern was, well, wait a minute, if we take the housing requirement, the homeless requirement out of the 10-year program, maybe no one would go to the 5-year program. We continue to have a homeless problem. Well, continue to have that anyway, but we wouldn't address it. So I basically said to Alex Farrell, can you propose a compromise here? And he did. And it was great. We had a little back and forth on it, but the compromise of our language, it comes from the administration. And it basically is every year they're going to evaluate, look at it, report to us, and it starts with a 30% requirement that 30% of the money be spent on the 5-year program. That's a minimum. And that number came from the administration. I'm talking about the, right. So that's the only difference, is that compromise was put in our bill. I don't even think it had happened in time to put into your vote.
So what you landed on was a percent.
Yeah.
Well,
It's a percent minimum. I want to say at the outset, though, I think that using VHIP for the homeless is something that's going to be an uphill battle all the way, just because the number of Section 8 vouchers that are around are getting less and less. And a lot of the ones that were unused are being clawed back, and we're going to see a real problem there. But for now, I think the 30% number, which the administration is comfortable with, is a place to start. So in other words, whatever the appropriation is for the year, 30% of it will be spent on a 5-year program at least, and then 70% on the 10-year program. Your manufacturer
and ADUs because
and ADU, yeah. Your manufactured home improvements, it's the same as ours. Your bond bank, chances are
you put more money into
we
it.
put more money into it and didn't get
But that's
appropriated. Yeah, I mean, our appropriations.
Well, none of our appropriations.
Yeah,
got
right.
that.
I know, we all got the haircut, right? And of course, there's only so much money.
And just for us, as we go through it, you put in 15 million, is that
We
right?
put in 15 million, partly because, and I know you heard from Michael Gahn, right? From the bond bank. I just think that they're so entrepreneurial.
Yeah,
The
they're great.
possibility for multiplying the money. They're sort of like they're kind of like a green bank. The Connecticut Green Bank has multiplied its base fund by a factor of 10. I just think, using public-private partnerships, working with the private sector, et cetera. So the bond bank, but the language is the same. I don't know where you ended up. I think we ended up with 5 million.
15, I think. We're
No,
not.
we
We didn't
proposed
up and around.
15, but I think where our budget ended up is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So they didn't strike it all together.
No, they did.
Ours, all of ours was.
You guys
Oh,
put, we put in ours a report for universal design, which is all about, because we discovered that a lot of agencies, they really wanted to get together and try to figure out what it meant. You put together a really interesting something, which is a report too, but it's different. It's the housing action plan. that you put together. So that's interesting. Keisha, what I was saying is I don't see these two bills like this. I
Mhm.
think they're more like this. I think it'll be relatively not that hard to kind of put them together.
I welcome that.
Um, we had something I think does bear explaining. We originally put a renter registry in our bill. And I discovered that this is a very controversial subject and has produced a lot of opposition. And one of the great advantages of having a Republican as a vice chair is I get to hear about it right away, and it helps us out a lot. In this bill, our bill came out 10-1, and really on the floor was all of the members of the committee voted for it. So we started nosing around and we discovered something really interesting, which is that in order to administer the renter credit, landlords file a landlord certificate. And what's in the landlord certificate?
We
Is a-
rewrote that last biennium.
Right.
Yeah.
And
We-
a lot of what
We did that work.
Yeah.
right, and now, but there were minor adjustments to it that were requested by the Department of Tax. It's
Okay.
in our bill,
Great,
but they're minor.
great,
And then
great.
what we discovered is if you merge that with the computer assisted mass appraisal town, what the towns do, and you require that the towns forward that to the Department of Taxes and share it with the housing agencies, we can put all that together and bingo,
Yeah.
you've got your.
Yes, that was Maura's moment of enlightenment. I think it was last year or the year before when we initially talked about
Yes,
this.
we, in fact, because we had a very public rental registry, and that was at the same time that advocates were shouting for a rental registry, and really almost no one had looked at what was publicly available. So we made that private to get more information so that we'd have good data to steer rental housing policy rather than simply having a political fight over what should be public.
Right.
And getting people to continue filing their landlord certificate at such a high rate. So I feel really strongly about the agreement we came to last year. I'm happy to look at, minor changes that I'm sure Department of Tax, just
Their-
requested what they need.
Their concern, Keisha, was, if I remember right, they don't collect data on the basis of units. They
Yes.
collect it on the basis of people.
Good point.
And they didn't want to try to change all of that because if they did, they were afraid they would start seeing a slippage in their landlord
Yes,
participation.
yeah.
So they put together the secret language.
Yeah. Well, and I really welcome the changes you made, it sounds like, to get better by unit data from the Graham list. We're losing so much institutional memory, and people are losing track of agreements that we have made in the recent past. And I just want to be clear that this committee agreed to that specific change on the principle that we'd rather have the information in aggregate than try and force the hand of people to share public rental
Right,
data.
yeah.
Although in our 8 biggest cities, we have very robust rental registries.
Right.
And my question is, we want to also make sure we get that data too, that we can integrate that into, so that we have a full picture, not just.
I think that the VHFA and VHCD, their view is they're happy with this. They
Mhm.
think they can integrate it all. Now, I don't know. Will it happen? I mean, they have to report back to us and we'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I worry a little bit about the rental registries at the municipal level, because I think we just need to be clear about one thing. The number of days you rent a place is not a permanent use of the property. You can't call something a short-term rental if somebody rents it for 2 months and then rents it for 3 days and then rents it for 6 months. That's not a listing of a short-term rental. And I just don't want to lose track of good housing policy
Right.
for political gain. We have to be really clear about what we're talking about. So you are stepping into something that's been a very ongoing conversation. And when I talk to municipalities about wanting to create a rental registry and get at short-term rentals, the best way to do that is to have a differentiated tax, which we have if you're doing a long-term or a short-term rental, And we get that information via a software system called AirDNA that VHFA uses to integrate. But trying to just name names of who has a short-term rental is just really poor policy.
So we're glad you did some update on it. We'll look
What
forward to seeing.
yeah,
Right.
and by the way, our bill effectively doesn't contain any short-term rentals. We did add a 1% option, and it was taken out by our Ways and Means Committee not because it was opposed, which of course it was, but because tax testified that it was in its current form, not easily administratable, and they just said, so I'm just letting you know, there's nothing on short-term rentals per se in our bill. We had an off-site modular report. In other words, like, what's the name of the company that has been so publicized?
Right, the one in here in East Montpelier,
Huntington Home.
Huntington Home.
Huntington Home.
We had testimony
Yeah.
from a number of people analyzed. And it's clear there's a lot that's interesting there. There's a report that came out just before the session. There was a fairly lengthy report that contained like a dozen recommendations. And when we had a joint hearing with our Commerce Committee, because we were one committee, we're two, and asked the FA, what do you need to move this forward? And the answer was, we can do it all ourselves.
But that's not the answer they gave us.
Well, what they said is we need a person and we need some walking around money to move it forward. So we put in $250,000 and it was cut.
Yeah, I love that we're calling that walking around money.
Well,
That's quite a bit of money. And actually, we took out that section because if they can do it themselves, we look forward to them doing it.
well, they will.
With the partners.
They will. What it was one FTE plus consultants.
Right.
But I've asked them whether they will continue it, and they said they will. They'll just be
Right.
slower.
Well, and I think we should talk about the municipal appeals section because I hope you hear testimony from Pew Charitable Trust, who we've heard from this year and last biennium. It is not necessarily the type of housing, it is the size of the lot. If you require a large lot size for any unit of housing, you vastly increase the cost per unit. So I'm hoping your appeals section it creates less opportunity to appeal.
Well, shall we talk about?
Well, it was that, what was,
I'm almost done, and then let's talk about appeals.
okay,
Your unfair housing stuff is all new. Okay, we have a separate bill, H-169, which we're in the midst of hearing literally today.
well,
And
you could feel free to
it's very
look at our
similar.
section and incorporate it.
We will.
Yeah.
Your development soil stuff, I'm very familiar with. In the end, in terms of brownfields, we had really good meetings with the people at brownfields.
We did it, and
Yeah,
we
and
incorporated what they're
And
recommending.
but the development soils, which you put in, we didn't, mainly because it would mean that our bill would have had to go to environment. And as it is, we had a substantial drive-by, or what do you call it, flyover with them. And I just didn't want to have the bill, have to have them have possession of the bill, which is slow it down to the point we wouldn't have made.
So
it.
we got the wave by and we were fine and we proceeded.
Okay, great.
So it's
I personally think it's a great idea. So
great.
in terms of appeals, here's what we did.
So is this the last thing changed
Yeah,
before we
this
get
is
to
the
appeals?
last- Actually, that's it,
Mm.
except for appeal. So there was, as you may know, the administration gave us their proposal way ahead of when the bill came out. But basically, there are two, right now in the statute, there's two groups of people who are called out as potential appellants if you want to challenge a project in court. One is people who live right next to the project. They're called butters nearby.
The joiners.
They're adjoiners, whatever. And the other was anybody else. And anybody else became 10 anybody else's, and then became 20 but anybody else's. But they could appeal for any reason whatsoever, unrestricted as to purpose. The administration's proposal dealt exclusively with the second group. they wanted to close down the second group. Or not close it down, but make it more difficult. Okay. What we did is eliminate the second group. And here's why. I have experience in other states. In other states, if you want to challenge somebody in court, you have a constitutional standing requirement that you have to show that you are damaged, actually damaged yourself. So my predilection was, I didn't see why we should impose this requirement here. And I was, not to my surprise, might say pleasure, the NRC agreed. As did, in a lot of ways, I think the administration, was sort of, kind of that reaction. And so what we did, then I discovered that Act 250 has a very similar requirement, and it's called an aggrieved person. So let me give you an example. Let's say I don't like a project. I live in Calais. There's some project proposed in Calais, and I think it's going to have runoff that's not sufficiently controlled and it's going to go into a stream. I can go before the planning commission in Calais. Oh, and I don't live anywhere near the stream or the runoff. I can go to the planning commission in Calais and I can rant and rave in front of them. I can go before the select board and do the same. But if I go to court under this bill, I would have to show the runoff was on my property and that was going to screw my house or whatever, damage me, or maybe that I swim in that stream or something. I would have to allege a real connection. And that's what we did. That's what's in here. The whole 20-person thing is gone. The abutter is gone because
Abutters are gone.
yeah, because in other words, our feeling was, I thought the abutter was just an attempt, a sort of not very artistic attempt to say you're connected to the property. There are abutters who may not have any standing. They may not be affected. I mean, they may have 10 acres and be not anywhere near the project. Let me tell you, to be perfectly clear, two issues around what we did. One is we took out the requirement that they live in the same town. Again, if you're actually can show, you're right next to the project, if there's a boundary line, it shouldn't make a difference. The other is, I think there's more work to be done. I think personally, when I look at what other states are doing, I think there are some bigger gains to be made. What we've done here is a good start, but that's all it is a start. And so this committee that the Land Use Review Board is doing a study. We took testimony from them. They are thinking big. They are thinking seriously about major changes. And some of those changes, like, I don't know, possibly rethinking completely de novo review. Right now, if you go before a town, let's say I'm a developer.
On the record review is where
Well, the towns don't have it. And so I go there, I put on the whole show.
We had that conversation last biennium, but it's good. And I want to have it every year. Yeah.
Okay, so, you have I put on the whole show. Then it goes to court, I put on the whole show all over again. In most states, that doesn't exist. The first one is on the record. The second one is, did you abuse your discretion? There's enormous deference. As a lawyer, I can tell you I have overturned abuse of discretion like less than the fingers on my hand in 25 years of practice. So that's one option. Another is to just simplify the de novo review. Take out depositions, they're thinking about those things. Well, I was sufficiently impressed so that I asked them, why are we waiting until February or January 15th? Why not get it November 1? And they basically said yes, except please November 15th. And I agree.
Right.
And so I think that I intend during the summer to go to the meetings and make sure that, well, or I don't know, watch to make sure and hopefully that there's actual real consideration of streamlining. Because although everybody points the finger at Act 250, what I keep hearing is it isn't only Act 250, it's all the appeals that come from municipal jurisdictions and we're not dealing with this yet, state agencies.
Right. The
And
state
so
agency permit.
we're gonna
I
have-
have a bill.
Yeah, we have to completely rethink the way we do this permitting. And it's gonna take, I mean, there's gonna be a lot of, what's the word? There's gonna have to be a lot of pressure put on the agencies, and that's gonna have to come from the governor eventually. I mean, it's really, we're gonna have to rethink how we do it. So anyway,
Can
this was
I,
a modest start.
well, so the reason, Senator Weeks, that I am trying to conjure up what happened last biennium is because on the one hand, it's important to keep bringing the ideas up. And on the other hand, we need to make sure we know why we were stopped from pursuing it any further, just to make sure we don't tread the same path. And when we had the conversation about de novo and on the record, probably for the third time in the last decade in the legislature, the stakeholders came forward and said it was, less of an issue than had been recently presented, and that it would be somewhat of a hardship for our communities to have an on the record review. So the LRB, who I spoke with at their last meeting about our past two bills and our intent, would have a lot of work to do to see if there are resources and we can answer some government operations questions about local on the record review. We simply didn't have the resources to conjure up to make that happen. It hopefully will be part of a longer process. I do have a bill on A&R permits in the Senate Natural Resources Committee, so I hope you will work hard with your colleagues in the House to make that the next step in what we do to tackle this overall question of barriers to developing housing.
I actually believe that, again, it may be naive. I don't have the background of having watched this go half a dozen times.
Mhm.
Yeah, but a very different background.
It's a
which is
different
super helpful.
background. I believe that there is a win-win out of it because, the fight all the time is the environmental community wants planning to be robust and the development community wants as few barriers as possible. And I think the solution, we've talked about this, will be to move as much as we can away from the permitting up to the planning.
Right.
And that once the planning is done and the permitting is all done at the planning level, not at the permit level, then developers know I walk in here, all I need is a building permit.
Right. Then
And
it green lights it.
Consistency and predictability.
Yeah.
Comments?
Thank you. This is great. I'm really optimistic on what we're going to look at with appeals. On what you just said, I agree in sense, but you said developers want to, less barriers. I really see developers wanting more certainty, less uncertainty. I think
You're absolutely right.
they're
They
fine
wanna
with
know where
barriers,
they're
make
saying.
it clear, but if it's like
Exactly.
foggy.
I know, well, and
Yeah.
litigation and the problem with, a lot of this is they know they have to get this permit, but they have no idea what the hearing will look like, what the conditions will be. I do feel there are two truths here about appeals. On the one hand, there are people who say, don't exaggerate the problem. There aren't that many appeals. Zone A, Judge Zone A testified to that.
Yeah.
It's true. That is true. But it is also true that, this state, I spent a lifetime in California where there's so many developers, so much growth pressure, so much happening. Here, the problem is almost nothing is happening.
Right.
And doesn't pencil out. The development doesn't pencil out. So I think the mere perception that it is so hard here to get permits, regardless of the truth,
Right.
the perception itself is damaging because our whole development effort, housing development effort is so fragile.
Right.
Part of this, though, I go back to two words. One is predictability, and the second is timeliness. And we have two problems, and those are the two that I think are the most significant. And they go back to the things that we've been discussing this morning, that even if you go through all of the long period of time that it takes to get all the local permits and so on and so forth, you still have no certainty at the end as to whether or not your process, your development is going to approve or not be approved. There's a lack of certainty. And then second is time, because of all the various steps that we put through are not streamlined. They're almost, particularly in terms of the A&R committee, are sequential. And you may go through each of the particular groups that do the approval and get a permit for that, and so on and so forth. But of course, when you get to the last one, that person's on vacation. And again, it's the sequential nature of what we do that means we don't have a coordinated nature in which you have a permit that multiple people can deal with in the agency. Part of it is our size, but also part of it is our structure.
We did go after that in brownfields, and you did too.
Yeah.
And let's see what comes back from them on, I think it's also in November. And so that's timely enough.
Yes.
Let's see what we come up with.
Okay, Keisha and then Tom.
I was trying to write down, so there's three things that I'm hoping, I mean, you do have a unique expertise to bring to this, and I welcome that. I feel like I've been doing this in a vacuum for a long time. And so this is really welcome. I think there are three areas that we should be following up on, and I'll try to remember them. One is dispositive permitting in A&R. I don't have that in a bill because I feel like our ledge council is highly burdened, but I was trying to get at between Ellen Chakowski and A&R, why, once you get an A&R permit for something, that can still be appealed in another process. Even though there is a comment period and an appeal process within that permit. So that's one. You had Judge Zone in. And I love how you're Googling dispositive. I agree with you. You had Judge Zone in. I hope someone asked, or I want to get to the bottom of, are there cases that they're allowing that are somewhat frivolous? I mean, if you have this aggrieved status, I'm hoping it does what you say, but I also have been confused why some of these cases have been allowed to go to the Supreme Court twice, for example.
Yeah.
This feels really silly. The third thing is,
Often there are things.
Right. So maybe what you're going to do.
I really think that there's bigger out there.
Yeah.
In other words, you'll probably hear testimony. I've had friends in the development community tell me, Mark, it's not enough.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. And I say, okay, I hear you. It isn't. This is the start.
Right.
This is the future lies ahead of you.
Yes. Well, and I would say, I started on House General with Tom Stevens. I had said in this committee last biennium, housing should be a conversation every year. We've gone whole 8-year decade period saying, oh, let's not touch housing, we'll only break things. But we rejected that in this committee last biennium. And I think that's incredibly important to continue, that there's maybe we've set some processes in motion with Act 250 we don't poke at right now, but there's plenty of work to do each year. The last thing that
That's your third thing.
Yes, the last thing I'm trying to look into is something I've talked to the banks about, and something that I'm trying to understand if Massachusetts is thinking about it or moving forward with it. And that is not stopping a project development while it's being appealed.
Right.
You noodle on that because you're the lawyer, but the banks are concerned that they might not be able to give secure financing to that kind of project. But can we say after there's a vote in the community, or it's gone through its first Supreme Court challenge and it's on to its second, that you finally get to start building the project? And if someone needs shrubbery at the end, that's what happens, but you don't stop the project.
Right, because one of the things you're proposing is once it's made it through the planning process, it has been greenlit and voted on
That's it. That's
by the municipality, that's it. Your appeal options stop there.
Yeah, I think you're right to focus on financing, because I can tell, I teach development finance, it's everything.
Yes,
It's
right.
everything.
Yeah.
Okay, and banks, you know, you have debt, right? Cheap. Equity, that's your fellow investors, expensive, okay? So you want as much debt as you can have, so you can have less equity, okay? Well, debt is cheap to reach, so since it's cheap, the banks are unbelievably conservative and scared away by almost anything, and we have to keep that in mind.
Right. And Thomas.
This is great. I really appreciate this conversation. The other point that I have in these, with your expertise, I just wanted to overlay it, is that it's when I hear this statement that Judge Zone says that there are very few appeals, it reminds me of when I've heard that about 95% of Act 250 permits are approved. What's important to remember is there's so many projects that never got started. That they didn't get started because of the uncertainty that keeps that money at bay. And what I hear in the developer community is Act 250 is great for people in Vermont, for the Pomerleaus, the ones that know how this works and know the communities, because they know whether or not that project's going to get appealed and they don't even start into it. But that uncertainty keeps so much investment and dollars outside of Vermont because they're just scared of what will happen. So, I mean, I don't know if that tracks with what you're saying. It just, to me, it's about the projects that never get started that I'm worried about, not the statistics on what gets approved.
Or they get, you have whatever the numerical limit of the exemption, you have 1 unit less.
Exactly.
And the developer would be happy to build 5 units more.
Do you know how new it is for us to have a chair of the housing committee in the House who adds to that statement? I mean, that is huge progress for us.
I think that-
Please
I
keep
mean,
that
I
principle
have to be
in
clear.
operation.
I have to be clear. You are talking to someone who spent years as an environmental attorney. I believe in environmental laws. I
As a
feel
dean
like
of environmental
I feel like the housing emergency here, we can find a way.
Yes.
We can find a way.
Yeah. And we agree. I think that we can find a.
And it is actually a negative for climate change to push people away from where they work, to cause people to live another state over or 3 counties over and drive to the employment corridor.
Or to create housing that are just a bunch of ranchettes.
That's right.
As we used to call them in California.
We call those.
I thought it was a McMansion.
No,
No, ranchettes are slightly, not quite as great.
but it's on like, 20 acres.
Right.
Right.
So,
Thank you for your
Okay.
work on the appeals, and we gave you Chip. So we gave you the
yes, and I.
project that you are all.
Right, and I really appreciate it, and we're gonna hear your bill Thursday morning.
Great, because Keisha and I think are coming up.
That's great, and I have asked, I don't know what will happen, but I've asked Michael Marcotte whether he wants to do it at the joint hearing.
Great.
Because, they do TIFs, Commerce
Mhm.
does TIFs,
And downtown.
and we've had like 3 joint hearings with them, but
Right.
we do have 2 committees.
Right.
And so we're gonna have to figure that out. And I look forward to you guys being there.
Yeah,
Anything else?
we also, one of us has to also be here too. So we'll figure that out, but I think, yes. Any other questions for Mark before we get him on good? This is
Yeah.
great, very
We
exciting.
did-
I think we
Let's
did,
continue this discussion.
I think we did very strong complementary work.
Yes,
And I think
absolutely.
that we will end up with a splendid housing bill.
Can I just ask for when one or both of us come in, so you feel like you've really had the full graphic rich conversation about this is the housing crisis. This is the nature of it. This is what it looks like.
We've heard from 55 witnesses.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Including big developers.
Yeah.
Small developers, private developers. and
Right.
public.
Because what I've partnered with groups like Pew Trust with in larger national forums is that you can see the data in every municipality, every state, that when you expand housing opportunity, particularly multifamily housing, you reduce rents and you reduce homelessness.
Right.
And I just hope we keep that conversation where it needs to be to do this.
I'm happy to have you guys say whatever you want, but I do feel like my committee, I'm blessed with a good committee, I think. And,
Yeah, too.
there you go.
Absolutely, we are.
So and I think they're very aware that it is, I call it an emergency.
Yes.
Housing crisis is an overused term. It's really an emergency. And I think everybody in the committee is.
Everyone's on board.
Then I'll leave my PowerPoint slides behind.
Okay, great. Mark, we can't thank you enough. This is
My
great.
pleasure.
And, well, it's great. And we have been working
Yeah, it was-
well together.
Yeah,
This is great.
okay,
Thank you very much.
All right.
Good luck.
thank you.
With your-
Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Well, thank you for your work. We are very grateful. Committee, we have 5 minutes. Cam, do you have any sort of big picture? Come join us. And because we do have a side-by-side that has been emailed to all of you, we also have it and we'll print it out for next time that we meet. But it is here. So Cam, any high-level things you have for us for the last 4 minutes?
For the record, Cameron Wood, Office of Legislative Counsel. I will just echo a few things you've heard. First being, Madam Chair, was mentioned, I did pull together a side-by-side of the as passed. I had to do that a little bit manually because I don't have official versions of those bills just yet because they just passed, just last week. So I'll be, continuing to review it, but it is accurate to my knowledge entirely and includes all of the amendments. So it is truly the as passed. So like you won't see your appropriations in there. You won't see the tax credits.
Right, which is why we're taking
stripped
our
out.
original bill to the House.
And so, you have that draft 2.2. I had to make a quick, edit while I was in there. So I sent you 2 emails. So look at draft 2.2. I think Chair Mahali really, touched on, you'll see in the side by side, there are a lot of pieces in there that I've commented are, not in S-127, your bill, that were in the House bill. There are things that you'll see at the end, a lot of the things that are in your bill that I commented are not in H-479. So truly, I tried my best to keep the sections that were the same.
Very helpful.
Similarly, looking at each other. So I think Chair Mahali did a pretty decent job of describing what some of the major differences are. There are a few other pieces he left out. Obviously didn't have the time. We'll do a detailed walkthrough later. Yeah.
And how did they treat, because one of the issues that is sort of ongoing that was not resolved fully with the task force, with the landlord tenant eviction study. And I think some of us are very interested in getting that work to a point where it actually there are recommendations for us to change statute. Where did they address? I don't recall whether they addressed that at all and kept that work going.
Not in this bill, not in their committee bill that they passed out. I don't want to speak for Mahali about what his intentions are for the remainder of the term or next year. I know that the committee has done a walkthrough of a landlord tenant bill that was introduced by Representative Lamont, who's on the committee. And so they did a walkthrough of that.
Representative. Oh, sorry, Lamont.
Yeah,
Okay.
yep. And so, there have been some conversations, but there hasn't been, detailed work on a bill yet to date. So as far as whether he wants to take that up this session or next year, I don't want to speak for him.
Well, I think that given how unresolved that was and how much we need that work and how disappointed I think many of us were that they didn't come to greater a landing place and greater resolution. It's thorny. We appreciate that. That's why we gave it to a group that could really dive into it.
We might have made it too general and then we didn't bring the lens of why this committee wanted that study to the work. I take responsibility.
Yeah.
So that for some reason I thought you were on it. So
No, I was not.
really lost track.
So that's all right. I remember that conversation.
Yeah.
So I think that is one thing we may want to actually put a fire under because we desperately need to have our eviction laws reviewed and updated. And I think everybody feels that.
Do you want to give Senator Weeks the benefit? I mean, maybe Senator Chinden too, but do you want to give Senator Weeks the benefit of where that was last year that we had wanted to see?
So actually, I think we're going to ask Emily Krasnow, who chaired it, and go through what was agreed. Well, what the list of recommendations, and then I think we should look at the charge and maybe fine tune the charge and figure out what we want to do with it and how we want to take it forward. But it's one of those things that I think is not resolved that we did put on the table last year.
And I will say, just very briefly, Madam Chair, you had asked me to go back and review the report again, which I'm
Yeah.
doing. I think the report does a really good job of kind of summarizing the.
The challenges.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
But I
does.
think to your point, Madam Chair, it doesn't have any specific recommendations for
Right.
you all to then
Right.
to act on. But if you're interested in what there, I think the report does a good job of at least laying out what the issues are.
And as my father always used to say, a problem clearly stated is a problem half solved. So they did help us re-articulate and in large measure the problem. Now we have to actually solve it, or at least, yes, solve it. Let's try solving it.
So I've started to, go back and look at the report again to try to tease out some points for the
Right.
committee, and I'll go back and look at the charge,
Right.
of what initially was there.
Oh.
Maybe let's just have Cameron do that.
We can do Cameron. Well, yeah, so
Okay.
deference to the chair.
Sure. I mean,
At least have her for a short bit.
Yeah.
And have Cam do that. And then, because I'd really like us to see what we can do to move that forward and resolve the challenges that we face there. I think, Peter, we talked about that a little bit yesterday. So thank you, everybody. And,
In the side by sides, there is one as introduced. So you'll see that's a draft 1.1 of your bills as they were introduced in the
Yep.
House and the Senate. So that
and
would
then
include
2.2 is as passed.
Yes, ma'am.
Good.
we don't
That's,
have to yet.
You have
No.
it in your email.
it's in our,
You're at the committee page.
Yeah. so as passed by the committee and then as passed by the floor.
By library.
Yes.
2.2 is, 1.1 doesn't have the weight.
All in one place.
That's right.
1.1 would have it as it came out of this committee. So it would have the things that were stripped out in appropriations. So it has the appropriations in it. It doesn't have, for example, the amendment that you offered to include the VHFA piece from the BAA and the fire.
But
smoke alarm.
2.2 will.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry, I meant the House bill. What are we comparing?
As passed by the committee, I think both of them.
As
1.1.
the two bills were first introduced, and that would be as it came out of House General and as it came out of this committee.
Okay.
And then draft 2.2 is as they pass the body.
Okay, so after they went through Ways and Means and
Yes,
approach.
ma'am.
And the floor.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that will be helpful because I think we want to see what they really want.